Drake just got banned from the biggest hip-hop podcast in the game, and the reason why might end his whole image, from fake Tupac chains to wild Instagram rants, and from ducking real interviews to clashing with Joe Budden, Drake is moving in ways that got fans questioning everything. How did the sixth god go from the most embraced rapper in the culture to being shut out by the very voices that once crowned him? This story is messy, disrespectful, and straight up shocking, so let's break it all down.
Come on, you got to talk to more people than just Elliot.
Nah, yo, I can't do this with you right now.
Why?
Because I can't.
Because you're at the embassy?
Nah, I just I know where this is gonna go. It's gonna go left.
No, it's not. Yo, why do you think that about me, man? We can have a smooth talk. You do it with Tory Lanez and all your other fucking buddies.
It's gonna be bad for the brand right now. Oh,
but all the other OVO dudes kick it with me.
I know. Everybody.
You're the only one that avoids me for some strange reason.
Never avoid you. I just don't see you. We're never in the same place.
Because I'm too broke.
I didn't want to say.
You invited Elliot and B-Dot over there to the embassy. They got to see the Tootsie Slide exclusive. They got to hear Tupac in your bathroom.
Can I have another drink, please?
Look at this. You got a bartender there. Holy shit. Can I have a beverage? I'm parched. Get the fuck out of here.
Yo, go back to your live, man. I'm gonna talk. We have an interview to do for when the album's ready. I don't want to do this right now.
You've been saying that for a year, and then now I have a whole leaked album with 30 Drake joints.
That's old shit. That's not the new shit. Don't worry.
All right, fine. Enjoy yourself over there.
I'm gonna be in your comments though. Don't worry.
Yo, but let me ask you, why are you trolling me this way? Honestly, you don't think it's hurtful to me?
Why? What do you mean? It's with an encouraging undertone.
Drake and Joe Budden's beef is one of the wildest sagas in hip-hop right now, and it's way deeper than just a couple of IG captions or podcast rants. This story starts years ago, back when Drake was still tight with hip-hop media and Joe Budden was already making a name for himself as a blunt critic. At first, Joe was seen as the hater of hip-hop, always calling out rappers with no filter. But over time, people realized his takes weren't just hate, they were sharp, honest breakdowns of the culture. Drake, on the other hand, built his brand on staying untouchable, controlling the narrative, and making sure every move he made looked like a win. But when those two worlds collided, things got ugly fast. The first sparks of drama go back to Drake and his relationship with the media. Remember when Migos had that track calling people who hate Joe Budden? That wasn't just random. Joe had already been stamped as the go-to example of someone who will call you out. But here's the twist. At one point, Drake actually messed with Joe. He'd joke about him, comment on his lives, and even lean into the banner. But Joe wasn't just a troll. He cared about hip-hop at its core, the bars, the history, the respect. And Drake, he wasn't always ready for that kind of pressure. He wanted the love, but not the tough questions. That set the stage for years of tension. Things really blew up when Drake started clashing with Rob Markman, one of the most respected, least problematic journalists in hip-hop. Out of nowhere, Drake called him a goof, just for not catching a Lil Wayne lyric. Rob kept it classy, saying, "I could call you names too, but I know you love to sue." That's Rob, a respectful, fair, but firm. Joe Budden and his podcast crew discussed it, pointing out how Drake was throwing shots at people who weren't even against him. It was petty, and it showed how Drake had been moving lately, insecure, touchy, and quick to lash out. What made it worse was Drake flexing a supposed Tupac death row chain right when Kendrick Lamar linked up with Clips on stage. The timing looked shady, like Drake was trying to distract the culture from a major moment in Kendrick's camp. To a lot of fans, it felt less like honoring Pac and more like trolling Kendrick. Even Suge Knight spoke out from prison saying there was only one real chain and it wasn't the one Drake had. That move had people heated. Imagine if, years from now, someone with no real ties to Kendrick Lamar bought his iconic chain and flaunted it just to mock another rapper. That's how it came off. Drake didn't even post a heartfelt caption about Pac's legacy, just a flex, no respect. It wasn't about culture, it was about pettiness, and this pattern of disrespect didn't stop there. Drake's strategy lately seems to be isolating himself from American hip-hop culture altogether. He's been hanging with streamers like Aiden Ross and podcasters like Bobby Althoff instead of engaging with real hip-hop platforms. These new outlets don't ask him about bars, beef, or culture. They just joke around, keeping it light. Aiden even once said, hip-hop is dead. That says everything about how detached Drake's circle is from the culture that built him. Joe Budden saw through all of this. On his podcast, he called out Drake's behavior and even clowned him by calling him Supac, a fake Tupac. Drake didn't take that lightly. When Joe critiqued Drake's 2023 album For All the Dogs, saying it sounded stale and that Drake kept rapping about young women, Drake snapped. He unloaded on Joe in a long Instagram rant mocking his failed rap career, his modest lifestyle, and basically saying Joe quit because he couldn't win. Drake wrote, "This is a man projecting his own self-hate. I own a jet. He owns a modest house." It wasn't about music anymore. It was personal. Instead of addressing the critique, Drake tried to bury Joe with flexes about money and success. But to hip-hop heads, that didn't look strong. It looked defensive. This isn't the first time Drake reacted poorly to criticism. Go back to the Quentin Miller ghostwriting scandal. Instead of being upfront, Drake tried to spin the narrative. When Kendrick dropped his legendary Control verse calling out the top rappers, everyone was waiting to see Drake's response, but instead of firing back with bars, Drake gave salty radio interviews, dodging the heat. From then on, he avoided real press runs. He only did interviews in controlled environments where questions were pre-approved and edits were in his hands. No tough questions, no raw moments. Every time he did sit down in real interviews, he looked uncomfortable, defensive, or fake. That's why he's so against hip-hop media now. Not because they hate him, but because they expose him. The truth is, Drake has always resented the fact that in real hip-hop spaces, he couldn't completely control how people saw him. That's why he goes after easy targets like Rob Markman instead of outspoken figures like DJ Hid or Glasses Malone, who would actually fire back hard. Rob plays it fair, so Drake knows he can clown him without getting burned, but in doing so, he looks weaker. He's taking shots at respected, neutral figures in the culture just to prove he's above them, but instead it makes him look out of touch and desperate. And then there's Joe Budden, the one critic Drake can't ignore. Joe doesn't just poke fun, he breaks things down. He sees the patterns. He's not afraid to call Drake's music lazy when it is. And he represents something Drake hates, an honest voice that doesn't bend to money, fame, or clout. Joe has built one of the biggest hip-hop podcasts by being raw and real. That means when he says Drake is slipping, the culture listens. So Drake banning himself from Joe's world by throwing shots might feel like a power move, but it really shows he can't handle facing the truth in real time. After the Tupac chain stunt and the Rob Markman drama, Drake's moves started looking less like strategy and more like desperation. He wasn't just picking random fights. He was alienating himself from the very culture that crowned him. Think about it. Drake came into hip-hop as an outsider from Canada, but he was embraced heavy. From the jump, Lil Wayne brought him into Young Money, Jay Prince stamped him, and the whole industry rolled out the red carpet. He was doing interviews on 106 and Park. Magazines couldn't get enough of him, and critics were hyping him as the next big star. But now, he's acting like hip-hop never supported him, like he's got something to prove against the same culture that made him. That's why the Joe Budden fallout hits harder. Joe represents that culture, that raw honesty, and Drake doesn't want to face it. See, Drake's whole problem with Joe isn't just about the music critiques, it's about control. Drake wants to pick where the narrative goes. He's cool with Bobby Altoff asking about his dating life in a goofy podcast, or Aiden Ross laughing it up about random stuff. Those platforms won't ever dig deep into the hard questions. Why did you bring up Kendrick's fiancé in a rap battle? Why did you melt down Pharrell's chains and flaunt it? Why are you suing critics instead of answering them with music? Real hip-hop journalists would push those questions, and deep down, Drake knows those answers won't look good. That's why he avoids them and instead hides in these safe spaces that don't belong to hip-hop. It's not just strategy, it's running from accountability. Joe Budden broke this down perfectly when he talked about how artists today avoid tough interviews. Back in the day, every rapper had to sit with outlets like The Breakfast Club or Big Boy, where they'd face raw, unfiltered questions. Now, rappers dodge those spaces and run to streams where everything is light and easy. Drake embodies that shift. The moment he felt pressure, like during the Quentin Miller scandal or after the Control verse, he cut himself off from real media. From then on, all we saw were staged interviews he could edit himself. He went from a kid hungry for validation to a global star terrified of critique. Joe saw it and called it out, saying Drake just can't handle being challenged. And the proof is clear. Instead of answering with bars, Drake fires off Instagram essays about how he's rich, has a jet, and how Joe is broke. That's not rap talk. That's insecurity on display. And let's be real, Drake hasn't been the same in battles. When he clashed with Meek Mill, he had the upper hand because he moved fast, dropped back to back, and made history with a diss that rang through the clubs. But against Pusha T, he didn't drop a single track in response. And against Kendrick, he looked shook. Kendrick's Not Like Us became a cultural anthem, tearing through the charts and the streets, while Drake tried distracting fans with Tupac AI vocals and half-baked subliminals. It wasn't the hungry underdog energy that made him great. It was calculated, defensive, and corny. Fans started to notice. Critics didn't even have to say much. The music spoke louder than words, and when Joe Budden piled on with harsh reviews, Drake snapped because it confirmed what people were already thinking. One of the wildest parts of this saga is how Drake plays victim after throwing shots. He'll taunt Pharrell, mock Tupac's legacy, and take personal digs at Kendrick, then cry foul when media asks him why. It's like he wants all the smoke but none of the responsibility. That's exactly why Joe Budden banned him from the podcast. Joe said straight up, Drake doesn't get to clown respected journalists and then try to run back to hip-hop media for sympathy later. He can stay with the streamers, stay with the lighthearted content, and leave the real conversations behind. Joe drew a line, and the culture backed him up, because honestly, what's the point of Drake doing a real interview now? It's too late. His answers won't change how fans feel. The damage is done. And here's what makes this beef so different. Drake and Joe have history. Back in 2020, Joe was actually asking Drake to pull up for an interview. Drake was still popping into Joe's IG lives, trolling him, playing cool. But over time, the respect eroded. Drake went from banter to full-blown hostility, especially after Joe called for All the Dogs Uninspired. The critique about rapping about young women hit a nerve because it was true. Too much of the album felt stuck in the same old themes with no growth. Instead of evolving like Kendrick, Tyler, or Cole, Drake was stuck on autopilot. And instead of admitting it, he lashed out, doubling down on flexes. That's not confidence, that's fear of slipping. Meanwhile, Joe Budden has become the voice of fans who are tired of Drake's antics. He says what many are thinking but don't have the platform to scream. Drake wants to frame Joe as a bitter, failed rapper, but the truth is Joe reinvented himself and built a media empire. His podcast is huge, respected, and influential. When Joe says Drake's music is lazy, people take it seriously, and Drake knows that. That's why he doesn't just ignore Joe like he ignores smaller critics. He goes nuclear. Because Joe represents something that threatens him, someone he can't buy, silence, or control. The funny part, Drake still tries to clown Joe for retiring from rap. But that's the thing, Joe retired on his own terms. Drake wants to frame it as failure, but fans know Joe found his lane and thrived. Meanwhile, Drake is the one looking desperate, chasing clout with chains, lawsuits, and random IG captions. Joe's not pressed. He's sitting comfortably as the culture commentator who can stir waves with a single rant. That balance of power is what makes this beef sting for Drake. He can't win with money, he can't win with streams, and he can't win with hits when the core culture is calling him out. All of this adds up to one undeniable fact. Drake's relationship with hip-hop media is dead. He doesn't trust them, he doesn't respect them, and he doesn't want to answer to them. That's why he's locked himself into this world of streamers, YouTubers, and outsiders who don't challenge him. It's safe, it's easy, but it's also fake. And deep down, fans can see the difference. They remember when Drake was in the trenches, sitting down with real hosts, answering real questions. That Drake is gone. And Joe Budden, he's making sure everybody knows it. By the time 2023 rolled into 2024, the cracks in Drake's empire were impossible to ignore. The same artist who once moved like a flawless chess master started looking more like he was scrambling to keep the board together. And the Joe Budden beef wasn't just a side story. It became the symbol of a bigger problem: Drake versus accountability. See, Joe wasn't the only critic speaking up. Fans themselves were getting restless. They wanted growth, they wanted depth, and they wanted the raw energy Drake once had. Instead, they got recycled themes, petty shots, and defensive rants. And nothing shows Drake's resistance to growth more than the way he's ducked real conversations with hip-hop media while doubling down on staged environments. Let's be real, the culture has shifted. Kendrick pours his soul into every track. J. Cole reflects openly on his insecurities and career struggles. Tyler, the Creator, reinvents his sound every album. Meanwhile, Drake, the so-called sixth god, hasn't given fans that same transparency. He raps about darkness, heartbreak, fatherhood, betrayal, but never truly lets listeners into those stories. It's surface level, like he's scared to show cracks in the armor. Joe Budden called that out too, saying fans don't just want hits anymore, they want honesty. They want artists to stand in front of the mic and give them the truth. Drake's refusal to do that only made the criticisms hit harder. When Joe banned him from the podcast, it wasn't just about beef. It was about saying, you can't play both sides anymore. You're either in the culture or outside it. And honestly, Drake has been moving like an outsider for a while now. Look at his partnerships. Instead of working with journalists who live and breathe hip-hop, he's giving interviews to creators who barely care about the culture. Aiden Ross, who literally said hip-hop is dead. Bobby Altoff, whose interviews feel more like awkward comedy skits than cultural conversations. It's calculated, but it's also insulting. Drake built his empire on the back of hip-hop, but now he's pandering to audiences who don't even understand what makes the genre powerful. And when called out, his response isn't to reflect, it's to mock. Remember when he dragged Joe Budden on Instagram? That wasn't the voice of a confident icon. That was a man rattled by criticism, lashing out to protect his ego. Joe Budden broke down the bigger issue. Interviews themselves are dying out because artists don't want to deal with real questions. Back in the day, Charlemagne, Angie Martinez, Sway, they'd press rappers until something real came out. Now rappers avoid those spaces entirely. Drake embodies that more than anyone. His entire career after the Quentin Miller scandal has been about controlling the narrative, dodging accountability, and avoiding the rawness that defines hip-hop culture. Joe put it perfectly. Artists don't want honesty anymore. They want safe conversations that won't challenge their brand, and as a result, fans get less and less of the truth. Drake might think that's protecting him, but really it's costing him credibility. Look at how the beef with Kendrick exposed him. Kendrick used bars, stage presence, and cultural symbolism to dominate. Not Like Us wasn't just a diss, it was a movement, a track that united fans, DJs, and whole cities. Drake's counter, AI-packed vocals, Tupac jewelry flexes, and Instagram rants. It didn't match the energy. It didn't feel like hip-hop. It felt like desperation. And that's why Joe Budden's critiques sting so badly, because they're rooted in truth. Drake has the money, the hits, the fame, but when it comes to authenticity and respect, he's falling behind. Joe called it, fans echoed it, and the culture made it clear. The crown doesn't belong to Drake anymore. And here's where things get even deeper. Drake's decision to step away from hip-hop media isn't just about avoiding tough questions. It's about rewriting his own place in the culture. By refusing to sit with journalists, he's essentially saying he's above the game. He doesn't need to answer to anyone, doesn't need to explain himself, doesn't need to face critique. That might work for pop stars, but hip-hop is built on accountability. Rappers have always had to answer for their bars, their moves, their battles. By dodging that responsibility, Drake is cutting himself off from the roots of the genre. Joe Budden saw that, and instead of letting it slide, he drew the line in public, saying Drake is no longer welcome. That's a heavy statement because it doesn't just come from Joe, it reflects the mood of a big chunk of the culture. The irony is Drake would actually make for one of the greatest interviews if he ever sat down with a respected platform. Imagine him answering questions about the Pusha T beef, about Kendrick's dominance, about his fatherhood, about why he leaned so heavily on ghostwriters early in his career. People would tune in like crazy, but Drake knows those questions could hurt him. He knows his answers wouldn't satisfy, so he hides, and hiding is exactly what makes him look weaker. He can flex jets, mansions, and streams all day, but if fans feel like he's running from the truth, the respect fades. And without respect, all the success in the world won't fill that gap. At this point, the beef with Joe Budden is more than personal shots. It's about the bigger question. Does Drake still belong at the heart of hip-hop? Because Joe's critique is really just the voice of the fans who feel let down. They watch Drake go from a hungry underdog battling for respect to a global superstar who dodges accountability. They wanted the bars, the fire, the hunger. Instead, they got Instagram captions, lawsuits, and pop-friendly interviews. That's why Joe's ban matters. It's a message that the culture is tired of letting Drake skate by without answering to it. And here's the twist, Drake could fix this. He could sit down, open up, and show growth. But everything about his move says he won't. He's comfortable in the safe zone, dropping hits, avoiding hard conversations, and clinging to control. That might work for casual fans, but for the day ones, for the hip-hop heads, the disappointment is real. The Joe Budden beef isn't about who's richer or who sold more, it's about who's more authentic. And in that arena, Drake is losing ground fast. So when Joe Budden says Drake is banned, it hits like a cultural stamp. Drake can keep doing interviews with outsiders, but the doors to real hip-hop conversations are closing. He can keep mocking critics, but the questions will never go away. And he can keep dropping safe albums, but the hunger, the respect, the authenticity, those are gone unless he faces the fire head on. Until then, Joe Budden will keep talking, fans will keep questioning, and Drake's place in hip-hop will stay shaky. The ball's in Drake's court, but judging by his moves, he's not ready to play. He's just running from the game he once dominated.